Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to talk about something that will hopefully affect a lot of people and isn't something that's always really well known despite the sometimes extreme ramifications of what this thing is. Basically what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about why these bad boys, why flip-flops are junk food for your feet, why you should consider them a horrible experience for your feet long term and can be a real source of dysfunction right throughout the body. And we'll talk about what that is in a minute. So I think probably the most important thing to talk about right off the bat is in Australia, we call these thongs. In other parts of the world, they call them go-aheads for obvious reasons. Just so there's no confusion, when I talk about thongs, we're still talking about flip-flops, still talking about go-aheads. I'm not talking about a bikini bottom. Unfortunately, that's a common mistake that a lot of people make, and it gets really confusing, as silly as that sounds. So thongs, flip-flops, go-aheads, they're all talking about this. So I think the most important thing to, discuss with this is why these shoes are junk food for your feet. And the reason why I like to call them junk food is for very obvious reasons. So we know junk food is very easy to access and tastes fantastic. It's not up for debate. We know that that's the case. That's one of the reasons why it's such a problem. But it's the same concept with thongs and flip-flops in that they're so convenient to put on your feet, particularly if the weather gets warm in any way. It's just so easy to slip them on and keep walking. And they feel relatively comfortable to wear. You don't have to tie your shoes up. You don't have to wear thick socks or anything. It's just a really fast and simple thing that you can do to protect your feet from the elements, at least on the surface of the ground. So, but it does come with a consequence because these types of shoes, any shoe I guess in general is abnormal, but these shoes in particular are abnormal for one very particular reason. So before I get to that, just let me know in the comments below what you think it is and why do you think these shoes are horrible for your feet? And then we'll talk about whether you're correct or not in a second. So if you can pause the video, go down to the comment section, let me know why you think this is a problem, and then restart the video and we'll start to talk about it. So I guess the important idea here is the reason why a flip-flop is so horrible for your feet is because of this thing. I don't know if you can see that there. So this thing at the front here. So that is the cause of a heap of dysfunction for a lot of people over time. So like junk food, eating junk food doesn't cause you a problem immediately. Maybe your tummy feels a little bit upset. Maybe you don't feel fantastic physically afterwards, but there's no short-term consequences, sorry. The consequences are more long-term. So if you consistently eat junk food, expose your body to those chemicals, expose your body to all the unnatural things in junk food, then there can be a consequence down the track potentially. The same thing here. And the reason why this little piece of equipment here is such a problem is that when we put it on our feet, what it essentially forces us to do is we have to engage our big toe and our other toes to hold it in place. So if you've ever worn thongs before, if you've ever worn flip-flops before, you'll know that it's very, very hard to walk backwards in them, which is why they're called go-aheads, because your foot very easily slips out the back. It's hard to run in them. It's hard to kick a ball in them without the flip-flop going flying. And the way that we counteract that is by holding on with our big toe. Now this is a real problem for a number of reasons, but the main reason is that it forces your entire leg to compensate for that. It takes out some of the main stabilizers in the foot and the ankle, and it causes your arch to collapse more than it should, just because we're trying to do this. And one of the things that we see, and one of the consequences that we see long term, and again, you won't necessarily see this instantaneously, but if you've been wearing this for a week straight, you certainly will start to see these sorts of issues in their infancy start to accumulate, is it's a strong recipe for a stiff ankle. Because your ankle and foot have to change the way that they're normally loaded without this so much that your ankle becomes stiff and tight as a consequence. And I think you'll understand what I'm talking about here if, maybe not so much at the moment, but if you've been out for a holiday, maybe for a week, out in the sunshine on the beach, and this has become a part of your life. This is your footwear for a week. And what we often find is that when you come back from that holiday, we see a lot of people's tissue whether it's the ankle joint capsule becoming stiffer, the calf becoming tighter to compensate, the foot muscles themselves becoming stiffer and tighter because we're holding on so much. But we often see an accumulation of added stiffness and tightness in the area after prolonged use of thongs or flip-flops. So what we can hopefully see here, and if you've been watching these videos before, you'll hopefully know this really well by now, is that a restricted ankle is the foundation for a whole broad range of other leg dysfunction. So, if you're any one of the following people and you wear thongs or flip-flops, I want you to listen very carefully to this. So, if you are someone who has an Achilles issue, if you have shin splints, if you have plantar fasciitis, if you have meniscal issues, patellofemoral joint issues, iliotibial band or ITB issues, if you have some hip and low back dysfunction that's maybe non-specific, you don't necessarily have a diagnosis for it, just comes and goes, these could genuinely be an underlying root cause of that dysfunction. It can be a feature of your day-to-day life that has set those tissues up to fail because it's introducing bad mechanics and compromised mechanics in terms of handbrakes in systems that shouldn't be there anymore, or shouldn't be there in the first place. So I had an interesting patient probably 4 or 5 years ago, and their experience really stuck with me. They were a really strong runner, so they would run a lot, never had a problem, never had some Achilles issues, never had calf issues, never had plantar fasciitis or anything like that. Then they were in the middle of training for a race, which is probably 2 or 3 weeks after their holiday. They had a week holiday to an island, and they were on the sand down the beach, and this is what he wore for a week straight. Came back from his week of relaxing, he went for a run, all those sorts of things. But then when he got back into his regular running routine again, he suddenly developed some tenderness and some soreness in his Achilles and his plantar fascia at the same time. And he was quite perplexed as to why that happened, because he was still running. He wasn't doing anything different potentially in terms of his running program. But what he'd introduced into the mix basically was something that knocked his natural mechanics off its axis. It introduced stiffness and tightness and differently loaded tissue into a system that wasn't used to that. Took that back into his running routine, and he developed these problems, which thankfully were quite easy to turn around again because they were quite fresh and new. Didn't really impact his running. He went on to do really well. So, but what I want to give you guys is basically that broader perspective to take a step back and say, look, if this is a feature of your day-to-day life and you have any dysfunction from almost your waist down, this could genuinely be something to consider improving or changing to improve that dysfunction. Again, it may not necessarily cause you any problems while you're in them. In actual fact, it may feel quite nice. And these thongs are probably a good exponent of this. I don't know if you can see this, but the powers that be made these thongs with a slight arch in them. So people are aware of maybe the need for arch support in general, albeit just as a way to try and undo some of the mechanical compromises that happen with this. But the broader issue still remains. As long as these are on your feet, your ankles and your leg tissue is compromised. And again, you may not necessarily be guaranteed to have a problem, but if you do have a problem, this should be very high on your checklist of things to consider changing or eliminating completely to improve that dysfunction. So I guess with that being said, we want to talk about what you can do instead of those. What options do you have? And I guess the thing about flip-flops and thongs is that they look relatively cool. There's nothing fantastic about them, but they're not ugly. The alternative to a thong or a flip-flop is a sandal, a self-securing sandal. So something that has maybe a band or something at the back that basically you can slide your foot into. Maybe something that doesn't have the little knob at the front, so maybe if it's something that goes across, so you're not trying to hold on there. So it's basically secured to your foot with straps. You're not necessarily having to change the mechanics of your foot to hold it in place. So remember, that's the key component of these. If your big toe and second toe have to hold this in place, you're doing something abnormal that may have a consequence over time. So a self-securing sandal, as I said before, is a fantastic alternative to these. Generally, they cost a little bit more, unfortunately. A cheap pair of thongs can cost you $5. A good pair of sandals can cost you maybe $20 to $30, depending on the sandal. But it's well worth the investment if you care about your feet and your ankles. So that's one thing to consider. Now, the second thing to consider is, can you go barefoot more often? So we know that being barefoot is obviously a natural thing. We're born barefoot. We're designed to be barefoot. Shoes and footwear are clearly things that we've invented to serve a different purpose. Obviously to protect us from the elements, but at the same time, we use them to improve performance, hide our pain, but also we use it for aesthetics, which is obviously a dangerous thing because the amount of bad footwear that we wear, and again, we've done a video on what makes a good shoe, and I'll link it up here before, link it up here as well, or in the description. But there's all these features that we've decided are more important than good foot and ankle health. So if you can find more time to be barefoot, you can reconnect with the ground a little bit more. Your ankles will get looser, they will get stronger. Your foot as well, the tissue in your foot will become more mobile and stronger as well. Your balance will get better. Your feet will become more sensitized in a good way. You're not hiding them away in those foot coffins, hiding them away from surfaces with a thin layer of fabric or another material, thin layer of material. We want to get back to being normal again as much as possible. So if you have a choice, a genuine choice between wearing a thong or wearing a flip-flop or or just being barefoot, you want to choose being barefoot 100% of the time. Obviously, the elements outside, dirty pavements, glass, all bacteria, all that sort of stuff is a consideration for you. But when you feel comfortable in moments where you don't need to wear a thong or flip-flop, don't. Your body will thank you for it. The second thing, aside from choosing better footwear, is trying to reclaim some of the dysfunction that's occurred from being in those flip-flops or those thongs. And again, I'll link this up here as well because we've done this before on the channel, but I highly recommend anyone doing the banded ankle stretch. It just basically requires you to get one of the jump stretch bands or the power bands. Again, you can get them from Amazon, you can get them from any sporting goods store, tie it to something that's not going to move and wrap it around your ankle. So you won't be able to see this very well in the video here, it's because the camera's too close, but I've got the band around my ankle, I've got my foot on the ground, I'm taking a big step forward. You can sort of see it at the top there, the bottom there, sorry. All we want to do here is we don't want to sit down on it by bending our hips. We want to lean forward, so bring our hips forward and then bending our knee a little bit to tension up the ankle. So we're trying to look for a bit of tension, a bit of pressure through the ankle joint. We're using the band to de-stiffen the joint, to open up a rusty joint, a joint which capsule is very stiff, and we just want to stay here. So it's pretty boring. You can bounce in and out of that if you feel comfortable. To see that from the front, as we always do, imagine that the band's pulling behind here. The crucial point here to free up the ankle quickly is that we want to make sure that we're not letting the knee dump inwards. So again, as we always talk about with this stretch, if your ankle is restricted at a certain point, so if you can only get a certain distance because your ankle's stiff, what your body will do is it won't bust through that to make it looser. It'll hit that point and find a way around it. And it's that compromise, that basic dumping in, or you might turn your foot out, which again you can't really see, foot turn out, knee caves in. And again, it just changes the way that your entire leg is loaded from the tip of your toe all the way up to essentially the lower half of your back. So again, that's why it can be such a really important feature to eliminate from your day-to-day life if possible, just because it can have so many ill effects or cause so many ill effects for the rest of your body. So I think one thing just to touch on as well with this is you can tell this is a pretty well-worn thong, and you won't be able to see this, but it's literally a Corona thong, which is quite interesting in today's climate. So there are times where you can wear flip-flops and thongs. The key point and the perspective that you need from this video, I think, is that it can't be your default choice if you care about getting rid of your injuries for good. If you're someone who is an athlete, like the patient that I spoke about before was a really good athlete, you may not have any aches or pains because you can buffer this really well. But if you wear these for any stretch of time, you're costing yourself performance. So that's the version of you that doesn't wear this would be a better athlete than the version of you who does wear this, because you're taking compromised mechanics, subtle stiffnesses, tightnesses, you're taking these handbrakes into something that's stopping you from expressing normal function as good as you possibly could. So again, you may not have injury, but your performance will absolutely be suffering as a result. So it's something you can look into to get better. But the point I wanted to make at the end here is that these are quite well worn. So the important thing is just to know the consequences. So if you are comfortable doing the banded ankle stretch, you can get away with wearing these a little bit more often than not, just because if you wear them and you take the time to undo any of that accrued dysfunction, you can maintain a healthier balance going forwards. But it's always hard to know what that balance is. So if you wore these for 6 hours down the beach and you stretch yourself for 2 minutes, it's hard to know how much that's going to balance out. So obviously you want to pair wearing this as little as possible with doing this as much as possible to balance out that dysfunction, reclaim that baseline normality again. But if you're just running from your house to the letterbox, or if you're making a quick trip down to the supermarket to get some groceries and coming back again, you've got a life, you can make adult choices around when and how long you want to wear this for. But just be aware that if you do it for too long, there's going to be a consequence that you may need to spend some time undoing. So I think it's a really important thing to talk about, because everyone agrees that these are comfortable to wear, they're convenient to wear, but we haven't necessarily been doing a great job as a community pairing up the dysfunction that we have that often expresses itself in a completely different situation and where that may be coming from. So very similar to heeled shoes. Again, there's a video that we've done on this, but if these are in your life, make sure that you're aware of what they're doing to you, and then make sure you've got a strategy to undo that if possible. So again, let me know how you go. Let me know what you're thinking about your thongs or flip-flops or go-aheads in the comments below. If you found this information really useful, I'd really appreciate you leaving a like below. Those two things together really help this video reach more people. If you enjoy what we talk about, then please consider subscribing. The channel's full of this type of information. It's all based on what we talk about with our patients day to day. It's actionable information, important information that can help sort of be the missing piece of the puzzle of the dysfunction that you're dealing with. It may be even things you didn't realize that were going on with you. Ultimately, we want to sort of provide this manual for how the body should be functioning, what your expectations should be. So again, if you could subscribe to the channel, you'll just be sort of front and center to that information as it comes out. But as always, appreciate you watching. If you have any questions, let me know below, and we'll see you in the next one.